Is there evidence that would absolutely end Christianity as a religion? Evidence being that they found the remains of Yeshua decades ago. One biblical scholar claims it. Let's see what he has to say. About 20 years ago, I remember hearing something very sketchily from one of my former evangelical friends. And at that time, I probably would have referred to myself as a Christian, although a very fair-weather Christian, who was still very skeptical of many things claimed in the tenets of Christianity. But I had read Lee Strobel's book, The Case for Christ, approximately 5 or 6 years prior. So I definitely was leaning that way. I was just leaning that way with still some remaining questions. But my evangelical friend was very distressed and angry because he mentioned some sort of documentary which claimed they had found the lost tomb of Jesus, with his remains inside the tomb. Obviously, this presents a huge problem for Christianity. As a matter of fact, if it was true, it's the end of Christianity altogether. They would finally have to put the divinity of Christ in a storage bin, just like we did the god Apollo and the rest of the Greek and Roman gods. But this friend of mine had said other outrageous things. He had once claimed that an evangelical pastor had been raised from the dead in Africa, and that they found chariot wheels from the old Egyptian army that was chasing the Hebrews through the parted Red Sea, which closed upon them once the Hebrews reached shore. So I'd learned to take everything that this once friend of mine said only with a pinch of salt. And I really didn't think about it again. That is, until I did an episode on this channel about the empty tomb of Christ, and whether that claim was really legitimate or not. And the big focus of that episode, of course, was on the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, because this is a place where most of the apologists are convinced was the site of Yeshua's final resting place, right up until it wasn't. But there are 2 other tombs mentioned in that episode that I produced. That other sects have claimed was actually the final resting place of Christ, right before the climax to the whole shebang. And one of these was the Garden Tomb, which most scholars have dismissed because it doesn't match the historical position of where Christ would have been laid. And another one was called the Talpiot Tomb. And as I was doing this episode, I soon realized that this Talpiot Tomb was the one that my friend was referring to so long ago. The Talpiot Tomb theory has been propagated by a Professor James Tabor, and he's no slouch. He's not just some Ron Wyatt making outrageous claims based on absolutely nothing. He is a biblical scholar and professor of ancient Judaism and early Christianity in the Department of Religious Studies at the University of North Carolina, where he's taught and served as a chair from 2004 to 2014. So I imagine he's at least earned the right to have an opinion on the matter. His claim is that in the 10 ossuaries there contain the remains of Jesus and his family. Now, is this a wild speculation? Well, let's see. On first glance, it certainly isn't. The Talpiot tomb was discovered during the initial construction for an apartment building in the year 1980 in East Jerusalem, 3 miles south of the Old City. And in it, yes, 10 ossuaries were found, and 6 of them apparently had inscriptions. They had the names Mary, which would indicate the mother of Jesus. Then they had another name, Mariamne, which Professor Tabor claims to be Mary Magdalene. As the name was written in Greek, he states, and it is said that Mary Magdalene spoke Greek, according to these sources. More importantly, there's another inscription, which loosely translates to the name Jose today, which Professor Tabor would describe as Jesus' brother. And there's another one where the inscription reads Judah, according to one source, and Judas, according to another, but is described as the son of Jesus. And it has been debated widely over time whether Mary Magdalene was Jesus' wife or not. This theory which is much dismay to the Christians. And then finally the ossuary that says Jesus, son of Joseph. So it seems at the very first glance that this is a depth charge dropped on Christianity, because the remains are there in the ossuaries, but described as very badly decayed, as you would think after almost 2,000 years. Now, the story broke in 1980, but seemed to be kept under wraps. The conspiracy theory going around on the net that Israel really didn't want to broadcast this because they were afraid of the anti-Semitic reaction that would immediately follow if they went around saying they found the remains of Jesus Christ. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not. But the story began to rise to the surface in 1996, and in 2007 a documentary was made on it which is titled The Lost Tomb of Jesus, which was produced by James Cameron, written by Simcha Yakubovici. Forgive me if I'm not pronouncing that right. And this film caused quite a stir, obviously, and I'm pretty sure it was the one my evangelical friend was referring to. That was many years ago. So this was Professor Tabor's overall theory about the matter on how Yeshua ended up there to begin with. His contention is that because Jesus was crucified and died right before the Passover celebration, that they needed a temporary tomb to place him in. And this is where the theory that Professor Tabor puts forth, that this is when Joseph of Arimathea gave the body of Yeshua a temporary resting place until he was moved after the Passover, and that finally his remains were placed in the ossuary, like many people in that time. And also, Mr. Yakubovici in 2012 returned to the site and used a snake-like camera in the space of an adjacent tomb where he finds a picture of Jonah's whale with the inscription, "Divine Jehovah, lift up, thus confirming that this is the place of Christ. So I guess we can put Christianity on the back shelf now, can't we? Well, not so fast. It's a very much refuted claim by most biblical scholars, it seems, because the inscription of Jesus, son of Joseph, is only partially legible according to those in the know. They seem to conclude that the son of Joseph part is correct, but they're not sure the name is really Jesus. And there's also other names on the inscriptions, such as one being Matthew, that don't seem to relate to the Jesus family tale at all. And they also report that these are very, very common names: Jesus, Joseph, Mary. And as said, they can't really conclude that the name Jesus is actually Jesus, per most skeptics of this claim. Now, there was a statistician named Andre Feververger who claims that all these names in the same place gives a statistical analysis chance of this being the tomb of Jesus at a 600-to-1 ratio that it wouldn't be the tomb of Jesus. But many have also questioned the methods of his analysis. And as far as the inscription of the whale of Jonah, apparently no one sees a fish except Mr. Yakubovici. And they're saying how he translated the inscription of Divine Jehovah, lift up, as being completely mistaken, that it actually doesn't really mean anything related to Yeshua. Now, Professor Tabor also tries to match another ossuary found outside of the Talpiot tomb, which is known as the James ossuary, James being the brother of Jesus. Now, many think this is the ossuary of James, as the inscription specifically read, James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. But one source that I read said the James part is right, but the rest of the inscription was added later. And as far as this ossuary being once part of the Talpiot tomb, which of course would link James and Christ and be the thrown dart to the bullseye that ends Christianity, well, first of all, the bones were discarded from the James ossuary, so they have no way to analyze the DNA of this ossuary of James to see if it matches the DNA of the claimed Yeshua ossuary. And also, archaeologists report that the size and dimensions of the James ossuary would not match those in the Talpiot tomb. So where does all this leave me? I'm not going to say that Professor Tabor has a completely ridiculous theory. I would put this in the category of a slight could be, but it seems like there's just too many unknowns. They don't seem to have real confirmation that the ossuary that supposedly belongs to Yeshua really says Yeshua. Then they have a bunch of other names that wouldn't be related to Jesus' family according to the Bible. They have a statistician who many find methods questionable. It seems like the Jonah sign is largely made up, and it does seem like that the documentary, The Lost Tomb of Jesus, was made with an extremely high bias against Christianity, in all fairness. Because I'm not seeing how they have concrete proof of anything any more than the patterns of evidence try to prove with concrete proof that Moses led the Hebrews across the Red Sea. And it also seems from my sources that the archaeologists have a question of how many generations of bones were placed in these ossuaries. So there seems to be way more questions than answers. And I would have to place this under the gigantic category, like many claims on each side, of I just don't know. Now, if you like this content on debating whether the resurrection of Yeshua actually happened, click on that playlist card at the end of the video. And check out my own tale, which at least I admit is fiction, The Second Fall, an offbeat Armageddon that may very well offend everyone. Link is on the video description as well as the channel page banner, and I will see you next time as we once again take that sword of reason and reality and thrust it right through the heart of ignorance.